In this video, we'll be going over the history of Prismatic Crystal, a talent that mages only had for a single expansion. Prismatic Crystal was first introduced as a focusing crystal when announced at BlizzCon. In its original form, what it was supposed to do was be an item that you would place on the battlefield, and then you could attack the crystal for 10 seconds, after which the crystal would explode and deal 130% of all the damage it took, split between all enemies within 8 yards over 6 seconds. Although once Warlords of Dreanor Alpha went live, we were given the version that basically existed in the game all the way until it was removed. How it actually worked in live was you would still summon a crystal on the floor, then it would stay up for about 12 seconds, and every time you damaged the crystal, it would pulse the exact same damage to everything around the crystal, split evenly with all enemies within 8 yards, and the crystal itself would just take 30% additional damage, or 10% if you were frost. So it kind of worked like the initial counterpart, only it was a little bit better since it dealt the damage continuously instead of waiting for one burst of damage at the end. The crystal had a 1.5 minute cooldown, always split the damage evenly, so it basically allows you to convert single target damage into an AoE if you wanted, and was pretty much a staple addition of Arcane Mages throughout the entire expansion. Shortly after the launch of Warlords, they had to apply a hotfix to nerf the damage of the crystal in PvP, where it would only deal 75% of its total damage when it crit, and only half of the damage if it procced a multi-strike, which was a stat that only existed in Warlords of Dreanor, which was kind of like an additional critical hit. Mainly because big crits with 30% more damage could sometimes one-shot players. For the most part, Prismatic Crystal was always a strong choice to pick up, but it wasn't until Hellfire Citadel, the last raid of the expansion, where the real power of this talent kind of came through. You see, Hellfire Citadel dropped a trinket called the Prophecy of Fear, and what this trinket would do is when it procced, it would place a debuff on the target for about 10 seconds. Which would pulse AoE damage every time you hit the target with that debuff. So, Arcane Mages have an ability called Arcane Missiles, which in the span of a second or two can fire like 5 different bolts that all hit very close to each other, and each count as a hit in order to proc the Prophecy of Fear trinket. And the trinket was kinda balanced for normal classes that would maybe hit once every global cooldown, instead of 5 times within a global cooldown. So mages could already kind of cheese the trinket to get more damage out of it than it was intended. However, they could take this a step further with Prismatic Crystal. Since most proc chance trinkets will go off pretty early on in the fight, what a mage could do was throw down the Prismatic Crystal pretty early on, pop all their cooldowns, and just attack the crystal like normal, and reasonably expect Prophecy of Fear to proc on it almost right away. Then they could use their Arcane Missile procs on the crystal, which would both activate the effect of Prophecy of Fear, which would pulse its AoE damage and hit the boss. Then Prismatic Crystal would duplicate the effect of the AoE, and hit the boss a second time with the exact same effect, for 30% more damage, as well as all the hits of that Arcane Missiles. And so, with the combination of the trinket and Prismatic Crystal, Arcane Mages could already get more value out of the trinket than everyone else, and could double up on the trinket's damage, and it was actually such a significant boost in damage that some raid groups were able to kill current level raid bosses in less than a minute, by just having a whole bunch of Arcane Mages with the Prophecy of Fear trinket, throwing down the Prismatic Crystal at the same time while they all pop their legendary rings together, since Warlords of Draenor had a shared Bloodlust-like effect for all the legendary rings, which would activate the effect of all other rings in the raid at the same time. In addition to actually using Bloodlust, of course. Most of the time they could kill the boss in less than 30 seconds. This isn't really something that's normal at all, even if they were kind of overgeared for the bosses they were doing. Generally, you don't kill max level current content in less than a minute. So, Prismatic Crystal was ridiculously strong. With Legion and a whole bunch of class changes, they decided to just remove the talent rather than try to balance it. It was proved to be a little bit too strong with unintended combinations, and people didn't really like having to swap to the crystal to attack it anyway. Plus, there is the fact that if the boss moved, the cooldown was completely worthless since you couldn't move the crystal as well. Not too many people were sad to see it go away, except for the people who liked how overpowered it could be in certain circumstances. Alright, and that's the ability. If you have any ideas for future history of videos just like this one, I'd love to hear about them down in the comments.